Chapter 1. The Enigmatic Invitation. The October wind rattled the tall windows of Whitehaven Apartments as Hercule Poirot placed the silver letter opener with exact precision beside the blotter. The envelope that lay open before him was heavy cream stock, thick as vellum, and sealed with midnight blue wax, impressed by the device of a crescent moon cradling a single star. Even before he read a word, Poirot's moustaches had given the smallest quiver of interest. Quality always announced itself. He slipped the card free. "You are cordially summoned to Mooncliffe Manor, Cornwall, for the Feast of the Hunter's Moon. Friday the 29th of October until the dawn of All Saints. Come if you still believe justice can find a man even when the rest of the world has forgotten him. Your presence is required. An old friend who has never forgotten you." There was no signature, only an elaborate monogram, a stylized L, entwined with the same moon and star symbol from the seal. Poirot laid the card upon the green leather desk and regarded it as though it were a scorpion that had wandered into his breakfast. Invitations that spoke of justice and old friends were rarely innocent. They suggested debts, ancient or recent, and debts had a habit of arriving with interest. He rang the small porcelain bell for George, his valet. "George, my good man, tell me, do you recall a person whose initial is L and whose crest is a moon holding a star?" George, polishing a shoe to mirror brightness, considered. "There was a Lady Letitia Langtry in 23, sir, but her crest was a swan, and a Colonel Locke in 31, but his was crossed sabres. Nothing with a moon, that I remember." Poirot twirled one point of his moustache thoughtfully. "Yet someone remembers me very well indeed. They know I dislike the country, that I detest damp, and that I never refuse a puzzle. Mon Dieu, it is almost insulting how accurately they have read me." He rose, walked to the window, and gazed down upon the orderly London traffic. Far to the southwest, beyond the roofs and the smoke, lay Cornwall, wild, rocky, and, in October, lashed by Atlantic gales. A perfect stage for drama. The telephone shrilled. Poirot lifted the receiver with suspicion, as though it might bite. "Allô, oui?" A woman's voice, low and amused, floated through the wire. "Monsieur Poirot, you have opened my letter. I can feel your little grey cells bristling from here." He recognized the voice at once, though it had been many years. "Madame, or rather, Mademoiselle Lydia Lavenham, you are no longer upon the stage, I think." "Retired, rich, and restless," she replied. "The critics said I played Lady Macbeth too convincingly. Perhaps they were right. I have bought a house on the cliffs, Mooncliffe Manor, and I require the greatest detective in Europe to grace my little party. You require, or you desire, both. There will be 10 guests, a full moon, and secrets, older than the house itself. One guest in particular needs you, though he would sooner die than admit it. Come, Poirot, the trains are excellent, and I have sent a car to meet you at Truro." "You intrigue me excessively," Poirot said, "which is, I suspect, exactly what you intended." Lydia Lavenham laughed, a sound like champagne poured over broken glass. "The moon will be at her fullest on Saturday night. After that, who knows? People do strange things under a hunter's moon. Bring warm socks, Hercule. The sea air is murderous." The line clicked dead. Poirot replaced the receiver slowly. He had met Lydia Lavenham only once, in 1926, during the affair of the actress and the poisoned chocolates. She had been 25 then, dazzling, dangerous, and utterly without conscience where her own interests were concerned. If she had purchased a manor and was gathering a company beneath a theatrical moon, the stage was set for something more lethal than charades. He turned to George, who waited impassively. "Pack for 4 days, my friend. The heavy overcoat, the muffler of silk, the small revolver I detest but which sometimes proves useful, and above all, the heated slippers. We depart tomorrow for Cornwall." George allowed himself the ghost of a smile. "Very good, sir. Shall I inform Inspector Japp that you will be unavailable?" "No. Let Japp discover it for himself. It will do him good to practice without me." That evening Poirot dined lightly, sole grilled with lemon, a single glass of sauterne, and retired early. Yet sleep did not come easily. In the darkness he saw the wax seal again, the crescent moon cradling a star like a promise or a warning. An old friend who has never forgotten you. Someone, somewhere, carried a memory sharp enough to cut. And in Poirot's experience, memories that endured for decades rarely brought tidings of joy. The next morning, fortified by 3 cups of chocolate so thick the spoon nearly stood upright, Hercule Poirot descended to the waiting Daimler. The chauffeur, a tall Cornishman with the face of a granite tor, touched his cap. "Morning, sir. Miss Lavenham's compliments. We'll be in Truro by 3 if the roads stay kind." Poirot settled into the leather, wrapped his muffler twice around his throat, and closed his eyes. The great car purred southward, leaving London behind like a discarded costume. As the miles unrolled, he turned the invitation over in his mind. 10 guests, a house on the cliffs, a moon that would rise full and merciless on Saturday night. And somewhere among them, a man or woman who believed justice could still find them, even after all these years. Poirot permitted himself a small, decisive nod. "Very well," he murmured to the sleeping countryside. "Let the curtain rise." Chapter 2. Arrival under twilight. The Daimler crested the last hill just as the sun bled into the Atlantic. For one breathless moment, the whole western sky turned the colour of a fresh bruise. Deep violet shot through with molten copper. And then the light collapsed, leaving only a thin line of fire along the horizon. Mooncliff Manor rose ahead of them like something half-remembered from a nightmare. Black against blacker. 3 stories of granite and Gothic windows perched on the very lip of the cliff, with the sea gnawing endlessly at its roots far below. Poirot shivered, though the car was warm. "One does not build a house here for the view," he murmured. "One builds it to be looked at." The drive wound upward between wind-tortured pines whose branches clawed at the sky. When the car finally swept into the courtyard, torches, actual flaming torches in iron brackets, already blazed along the entrance. Their resinous smoke curled upward and mingled with the salt wind. A butler of immense dignity opened the car door. He was tall, thin, and entirely bald, with the solemn expression of an undertaker who has seen everything twice. "Mr. Poirot, Miss Lavenham is expecting you. This way, if you please." Inside, the hall was a cavern of oak and shadows. A vast fireplace roared, yet the heat barely reached the centre of the room. Suits of armour stood like silent sentries. Above the mantel, a stag's head with impossible antlers stared down with glass eyes that caught the firelight and threw it back red. Lydia Lavenham descended the staircase as though she owned gravity itself. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that left her shoulders bare, and carried a long ebony cigarette holder, though no cigarette burned in it. Her hair, once raven, was now threaded with dramatic silver, yet the bones of her face were still those of the dangerous beauty Poirot remembered. "Hercule, mon petit chou." She extended both hands, diamonds flashing like ice splinters. "You came. I knew you would not resist a riddle wrapped in melodrama." Poirot bowed over her fingers. One does not refuse a summons signed with such theatrical flourish. She laughed and tucked his arm through hers. "Come, the others are gathering. I shall present you as my surprise guest. Some of them will be delighted, others less so." They passed beneath an archway into the long gallery, a room so named because it was precisely that. Long, panelled in dark wood, lit by a dozen candelabra, and one enormous electrolier that had clearly been added in the 1890s and never quite forgiven for it. French windows opened onto a terrace where the wind prowled like a restless animal. 9 people turned as they entered. Poirot catalogued them instantly, the way another man might count cards. Closest to the fire stood a tall, thin man in his late 50s, military moustache, the posture of one who had commanded regiments. Colonel Archibald Hawthorne, late of the Indian Army, face sunburns the colour of teak even now. His eyes flicked to Poirot and narrowed with recognition. Beside him, a much younger woman, striking red hair, emerald dress cut, daringly low, clung to his arm with the proprietary air of a much younger wife. Mrs. Diana Hawthorne, née Carstairs, whose photograph had once graced the Tatler under less respectable circumstances. Across the room, a man with the face of a disappointed poet nursed a whisky. Mid-40s, prematurely greying, beautiful hands. Julian Landry, the playwright whose last West End triumph had closed under accusations of plagiarism. His gaze lingered on Lydia with something between hunger and hatred. Near the windows, 2 women conversed in low, urgent voices. One was small, bird-boned, dressed in dowdy brown. Miss Evelyn Green, companion to the other, a dowager dripping pearls and disapproval. Lady Constance Merryweather's lorgnette rose like a weapon when Poirot entered. A young man lounged against a grand piano, cigarette dangling from languid fingers. Fair hair, athlete's shoulders, the slightly cruel mouth of one born to privilege. The Honourable Miles Deverell, younger son of Lord Maltravers, rumoured to have been sent down from Oxford for something involving a dean's wife and a fire extinguisher. Beside him, surprisingly, stood a priest, black cassock, Roman collar, face like a kindly bloodhound. Father Anselm Doyle, Anglo-Catholic, controversial theologian, and Poirot's eyebrows rose, the younger brother of Colonel Hawthorne. At the far end, almost invisible against the dark panelling, a woman sat alone. She wore mourning black, though no one here had died yet. Her face was pale, perfect, tragic. Mrs. Vivian St. Clair, widow of the explorer Sir Gerald St. Clair, whose frozen body had been found on Everest 2 years before, with a bullet in the back no one could explain. And finally, turning from the terrace doors with a glass of champagne in hand, a man Poirot had sincerely hoped never to see again, Reginald Voss. Once the most brilliant barrister at the Temple, struck off 5 years ago after the Langtry Trust scandal. Tall, silver-haired, still handsome in the way of a ruined classical statue. His smile, when he saw Poirot, was slow and venomous. "Dear God," Voss said softly, "the little Belgian busybody. Lydia, you do keep the most fascinating pets." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Lydia's grip tightened on Poirot's arm. "Reginald, darling, play nicely. Hercule is here because I asked him, and because certain people," she let her gaze drift across the company, "may need him before the weekend is over." Colonel Hawthorne cleared his throat like a gunshot. "See here, Lydia, if this is one of your theatrical jokes, it is no joke, Archie." Her voice cut like crystal. "Tomorrow night, the hunter's moon rises full over the sea. Old debts surface under that moon. Old truths. Some of you have been waiting a very long time for justice, or for revenge. I thought it only sporting to provide an impartial referee." Silence fell, thick as the smoke from the torches outside. Poirot removed his douche hat and gloves with deliberate calm. "Mademoiselle Lavenham, you promised me secrets older than the house. Already I count at least 3 that could kill, perhaps 4. He smiled his small cat-like smile and bowed to the company. "Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. It seems we are all players now. Let us hope the script is not too tragic." From the terrace came the sudden mournful cry of a gull, swept inland by the rising wind. Somewhere far below, the sea hurled itself against the cliffs with a sound like distant applause. The hunter's moon was not yet risen, but already the stage was set, the actors assembled, and the first act had begun. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Garden Dinner had been a masterpiece of tension served on Sèvres porcelain. The long mahogany table glittered with crystal and silver, but conversation had been as brittle as the thinnest wine-glass. Lydia, at the head, had steered every topic towards dangerous waters, lost reputations, vanished fortunes, inconvenient deaths, and then watched the ripples with the satisfaction of a child dropping stones into a pond. By 10 o'clock the ladies had withdrawn. The gentlemen had lingered over port only long enough for Colonel Hawthorne to insult Julian Landry's politics, and for Reginald Voss to remind everyone, with silky precision, exactly how much money each of them had lost in the Langtry Trust collapse. Poirot had excused himself early, pleading travel fatigue. In truth, he wished to breathe air that did not taste of old grudges. He found the moonlit garden through a side door in the library. The wind had dropped to a restless murmur. High above, the moon, 3/4 full and the colour of tarnished silver, floated in a sky scrubbed clean of clouds. The garden was terraced down the cliff in a series of stone balustrades and neglected rosebeds, ending at a wrought-iron gate that opened onto the narrow cliff path. Somewhere far below, the sea hissed and withdrew, like a conspirator rehearsing a secret. Poirot drew his overcoat tighter and stepped onto the gravel. The crunch of his small polished shoes sounded unnaturally loud. He had not walked 10 paces before voices drifted up from the lowest terrace, low, urgent, unmistakably clandestine. "You promised it would be finished years ago." A woman's voice, trembling with fury. "Vivian St. Clair." A man answered, almost too soft to catch. "Circumstances changed, Vivian. Gerald's death. Gerald's murder, you mean." Her laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Don't pretend you mourned him." Poirot eased into the shadow of a yew hedge, thick and ancient, its branches shaped by centuries of salt wind into tortured spirals. Below him, on the moon-drenched terrace, 2 silhouettes stood close. Vivian, in her black velvet cloak, hood thrown back so that her pale hair blazed like a torch, and the man, tall, silver-haired, unmistakable, Reginald Voss. Voss lifted a hand, as though to touch her cheek. She flinched away. "Touch me and I'll scream loud enough to bring the whole house," she hissed. "That would be unwise," Voss murmured. "Some secrets belong to more than one person. Scream, and you drag us both down." Vivian's reply was lost as footsteps approached along the upper path. Poirot pressed flatter against the yew. Lydia Lavenham appeared, a white fox fur stole about her shoulders, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. She moved with the certainty of someone who owned every inch of darkness. "Darlings," she called lightly, "plotting without me! How very rude!" Voss turned smoothly. "Merely taking the air, Lydia. with Mrs. St. Clair draped over you like ivy. Do spare me." Lydia handed Vivian a glass. The widow took it with fingers that trembled. "Drink, Vivian. You look as though you've seen the ghost of husbands past." Vivian drained half the champagne in one swallow. Lydia's gaze flicked to the yew hedge. For an instant Poirot thought she had seen him, but her smile never wavered. "Come inside, both of you. The night is for lovers or killers, and I'm not sure which category you fit tonight." Voss offered Vivian his arm with mocking courtesy. She ignored it and swept past him up the steps. Lydia followed, pausing only to toss over her shoulder. "Don't linger too long, Reginald. The moon makes people reckless." Their footsteps faded. Poirot waited a full minute before moving. He was about to retreat when another voice, much closer, spoke behind him. "Enjoying the performance, Monsieur Poirot?" He turned without haste. Julian Landry leaned against the stone urn at the head of the steps, cigarette glowing like a small red eye. "I find," Poirot said calmly, "that gardens at night are full of instruction." Landry exhaled smoke toward the moon. "They're full of something, certainly. Did you catch the gist? Voss and the Ice Widow?" "I caught enough to know there are undercurrents here strong enough to drown the unwary." Landry gave a soft, bitter laugh. "Mooncliffe has always been good at drowning people. Did Lydia tell you the house's charming history? Smugglers, suicides, at least one bride who walked into the sea still wearing her wedding dress. The locals say on the night of the hunter's moon, the cliff path shows you the way to whatever you most desire, or most deserve." He dropped the cigarette, ground it beneath his heel. "Personally, I think the only thing the path leads to is a 200-foot drop, but then I'm a cynic." Poirot studied the playwright's shadowed face. "And what is it you desire, Monsieur Landry, or deserve?" Landry's smile was thin. "Redemption, perhaps, or simple revenge. They feel remarkably similar after midnight." He pushed away from the urn. "Good night, little detective. Mind the loose stones near the gate. They have a habit of giving way when you least expect." Ava vanished into the house, leaving only the faint scent of Turkish tobacco and danger. Poirot lingered a moment longer. From the lowest terrace came the soft scrape of a match. Someone else had been listening. Someone who preferred to remain unseen. A tiny flare of light revealed a pale, intense face for half a second, before darkness swallowed it again. Miss Evelyn Green, the dowdy companion, stood alone where Voss and Vivian had argued moments before. She was staring fixedly at something in her hand, a small object that caught the moonlight and threw back a cold, metallic gleam. A key? A locket? Poirot could not tell before she closed her fist and slipped away toward the cliff gate, moving with surprising swiftness for one so seemingly timid. The moon climbed higher, indifferent and bright. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck 11, each stroke floating across the garden like a warning. Poirot turned back toward the lighted windows. He felt the familiar prickle at the base of his skull, the certainty that the pieces of a deadly puzzle were already falling into place, even though he could not yet see the picture. As he reached the library door, a final whisper reached him, carried on the wind from the open sea. "Tomorrow night!" A woman's voice. "Vivienne's, soft as death. One way or another, it ends." Poirot closed the door behind him and stood for a long moment in the warm, book-scented darkness. "Oui," he murmured to the empty room. "Tomorrow night, under the hunter's moon, many things will end. Let us hope, mes amis, that murder is not among them." Yet, even as he spoke, he knew, with the absolute certainty of long experience, that hope was already far too late. Chapter 4. The Midnight Feast. The great dining room had been transformed. The heavy Jacobean table was gone. In its place stood a single round table of black marble, laid for 12, but with only 11 chairs. Candles, thick, blood-red and guttering in the draught, cast long, wavering shadows across the vaulted ceiling. Above the mantel, the stag's head had been draped with a black veil, as though even the dead beast were in mourning. A single place setting remained empty. A silver plate turned face down, a black napkin folded like a shroud, a wine glass filled with what looked suspiciously like ink. Lydia Lavenham swept in at the stroke of midnight, clad now in a robe of silver lamé that caught the candlelight and flung it back in shards. In her hands she carried a small ebony box. "My darlings," she announced, "the moon is almost ripe. Tonight we honour the old customs. No servants after midnight, the house is ours alone. We shall feast, we shall confess, and we shall see what the hunter's moon drags into the light." Colonel Hawthorne muttered something about damned theatrical nonsense, but he took his seat. The others followed, moving like sleepwalkers. Poirot found himself placed between Diana Hawthorne, who smelled of gardenias and nervous perspiration, and Father Anselm, whose rosary clicked softly against the table edge. Lydia opened the ebony box and drew out a deck of cards, large, hand-painted, clearly antique. The figures on them were not the usual kings and queens, but skeletons in medieval dress, dancing beneath a swollen moon. "Tarot de lune," she said softly. "My great-grandmother brought them from Prague. On the night before the full moon, they are said to speak truth, no matter how ugly." Reginald Voss gave a low laugh. "And if we prefer lies?" "Then drink more wine, cher Reginald, and pretend you are still in court." She began to deal. Each guest received one card, face down. Poirot's fingers closed over heavy vellum. He did not turn it yet. "Rules," Lydia continued. "When your card is revealed, you must tell a secret you have never spoken aloud in this company. A real secret, if you lie." She smiled sweetly. "The moon will know." The first card belonged to Miles Deverell. He flipped it with theatrical boredom. A skeleton knight on a black horse, scythe raised, La Mort. "How dreadfully fitting," he drawled. "Very well. I once pushed a man off a balcony in Cairo because he knew too much about my father's financial arrangements. He lived, unfortunately, paralyzed. Father paid the hospital bills for life. Happy now." Diana Hawthorne went white beneath her rouge. The Colonel's moustache bristled like an angry cat. Next, Julian Landry turned his card. A hanged man upside down beneath the moon. Le Pendu. "I stole the plot of my greatest play," he said quietly, "from a woman who loved me. She killed herself when it opened to rave reviews. I still have the letters. I read them when I need inspiration." Lady Constance Merriweather received Justice, a blindfolded woman with scales, and delivered a venomous little monologue about cutting her only son out of her will for marrying a chorus girl. Miss Green, beside her, drew the tower struck by lightning and said nothing at all. Her lips merely trembled. Vivian Sinclair's card was the moon itself. 2 dogs howling, a crayfish crawling from dark water. She stared at it for a long moment. "I know who shot my husband on Everest," she whispered, "and I know why. I have the proof in my room. Tomorrow I will give it to the proper authorities, unless someone stops me." Reginald Voss leaned forward, eyes glittering. "My dear, you are overwrought." Father Anselm turned his own card last among the guests. The devil, grinning, horned, holding broken chains. The priest's voice was gentle. I once heard a confession I was not meant to hear. A mortal sin, unabsolved because the penitent fled before I could grant absolution. I have carried that knowledge for 15 years. Tonight it weighs heavier than ever. The candle flames suddenly flattened, as though a door had opened somewhere. Wind prowled the corridor outside. Lydia reached the empty place setting and laid the final card upon the upturned plate. She did not turn it. This one, she said, is for the person who is not yet among us. The 13th guest. Tradition says Death himself sits at the table on the eve of the hunter's moon. Colonel Hawthorne slammed his palm on the table. Enough of this witchery! I'll have no more. He stopped. Every candle had gone out at once. The room plunged into absolute darkness, broken only by the pallid wash of moonlight through the tall windows. A woman screamed, short, sharp, cut off as though a hand had been clapped over her mouth. Glass shattered. Something heavy fell to the floor. Poirot was already on his feet, matches rasping. The candles flared back to life one by one. The black marble table was chaos. Wine bleeding across the cloth like spilled blood. The ebony box overturned. Cards scattered. The empty chair had been knocked backward. On the floor lay the 13th tarot card, now revealed. It was blank, pure white, no image at all. But across it, in fresh crimson that still dripped, someone had scrawled with a finger. Soon. Reginald Voss was the first to recover his voice. A charming parlour trick, Lydia. Blood from the kitchen, no doubt. Lydia's face had lost every trace of colour. I did not write that, she said flatly, and that is not paint. Poirot knelt, touched the lettering with a cautious fingertip, and brought it to his nose. Metallic, warm. No, he said quietly. It is blood. Human, I would wager. And very fresh. From the hallway came the sudden, frantic jangling of the old-fashioned bellboard. Every bell ringing at once, though no one stood in the servants' corridor to pull the wires. Father Anselm crossed himself. God preserve us. Outside, the moon, now almost full, hung directly above the house like a watchful eye. The wind had risen again. It moaned around the eaves with a sound almost like human laughter. Lydia righted the fallen chair with shaking hands. The feast, she said, attempting lightness and failing, is concluded. I suggest we all retire. Lock your doors if you wish. Tomorrow the moon is fullest, and whatever has begun tonight will finish then. One by one they left the room. Footsteps hurried. Voices hushed. Poirot lingered, studying the blank blood-stained card. Diana Hawthorne paused beside him. Monsieur Poirot, she whispered, my husband keeps a revolver in his dressing case. Should I? Keep it close, madame, he answered softly, and trust no one, not even your husband. When the dining room was empty at last, Poirot turned the 13th card over. On the back, scratched faintly with a knife point, were 2 words, You failed. He stood a long time in the moonlight, the little Belgian detective with the impeccable moustache, feeling the old chill that always came when death moved from possibility to certainty. Somewhere in the sleeping house, a clock began to chime 1, 2, 3. Poirot slipped the bloodied card into his pocket. Non, he told the listening darkness. It is not I who have failed, not yet. But for the first time in many years, Hercule Poirot was not entirely sure he spoke the truth. Chapter 5. The Shadowy Scream. The house slept uneasily. At 23 minutes past 2, Hercule Poirot sat fully dressed in the small armchair of his bedroom, a green-shaded lamp burning low, the blood-stained tarot card resting on the table beside a glass of tisane he had not touched. He had drawn the curtains only halfway. Moonlight poured across the carpet in a white blade sharp enough to cut. He was waiting for what, exactly, he could not have said. But the house itself seemed to hold its breath. A floorboard creaked in the corridor, once, twice, then silence, someone passing or someone listening at doors. Poirot's hand rested lightly on the pocket that held his small pistol. Then it came. A scream, high, raw, inhuman, tore through the night like a knife through silk. It rose, fractured, and died abruptly, as though the throat that produced it had been suddenly stopped. Poirot was already moving. He snatched the electric torch George had packed, in case country houses proved primitive, and flung open his door. The corridor was a tunnel of darkness lit only by the moon spilling through the great window at the far end. Doors were opening. Colonel Hawthorne, in a crimson dressing gown, revolver in hand, Diana Hawthorne clutching a silk wrapper to her throat, Julian Landry bare-chested and barefoot, Father Anselm already murmuring Latin under his breath. "Which direction?" the colonel barked. Poirot cocked his head. The scream had come from outside, not within. "The terrace!" cried Miles Deverell, appearing from the west wing stairs. "It came from the garden!" They ran, a strange, half-dressed procession, through the long gallery, across the library, and burst through the French windows onto the upper terrace. The night was ferociously bright. The moon, one silver sliver short of perfection, flooded the garden in cold fire. Every pebble, every twisted yew, every pale rose stood out with merciless clarity. "There!" shouted Diana. Halfway down the cliff path, a figure staggered and fell. It was Vivian St. Clair, still in the black velvet evening gown she had worn at dinner. One shoe missing, hair unbound, and streaming like a battle standard. She was on her knees, staring at something on the ground before her. Poirot reached her first, the others close behind. He knelt, torch beam cutting the darkness. Reginald Voss lay on his back, arms flung wide as though embracing the moon. His white dress shirt was soaked dark from collar to waist. The silver lame cummerbund had turned the colour of fresh liver. A thin, elegant stiletto, the kind carried by society ladies for opening letters, protruded from just beneath his sternum. His eyes, wide and fixed, reflected the moon like twin coins. "Mon Dieu!" Poirot breathed. Vivian began to laugh, horrible, high, uncontrollable. Diana Hawthorne slapped her hard across the face. The laughter snapped off as suddenly as it had begun. He was behind me on the path," Vivian stammered. "I came out for air. I couldn't sleep after the card. I heard footsteps. I ran. Then I turned and he fell against me. The knife was already in him. I only tried to catch him. Look, my hands!" She held them up. They were drenched in blood to the wrists. Colonel Hawthorne knelt heavily, pressed 2 fingers to Voss's carotid, and shook his head. Dead 10 minutes at most, still warm. Father Anselm began the prayers for the dying, though it was far too late. Poirot stood, sweeping the torch in a slow arc. The cliff path was narrow, bordered on the left by the rock face, on the right by a sheer drop to the rocks and sea 200 feet below. Only one set of footprints showed clearly in the soft earth, small, heeled, Vivian's. But higher up, near the garden gate, the gravel had been violently disturbed, as though several people had scuffled. A single larger footprint, a man's brogue, pointed toward the house. The edge crumbled where weight had shifted suddenly. Poirot's beam caught something glinting among the broken stems of seathrift. He stooped and retrieved it. A small gold cufflink, shaped like a crescent moon entwined with a star. Exactly the device on Lydia's wax seal. Lydia herself appeared at that moment, wrapped in a man's dressing gown several sizes too large, hair in steel curlers that made her look unexpectedly vulnerable. She took in the scene. Voss dead, Vivian covered in his blood, the stiletto, the cufflink, and for once the actress had no lines. "Reginald," she said at last, voice cracked. "Oh, you stupid, greedy man." Poirot turned to her sharply. "This cufflink, mademoiselle, it is yours?" She stared at it as though it were a scorpion. "I had a pair made for each guest as souvenirs. Reginald was wearing his tonight. So were all the gentlemen." The Colonel glanced down at his own sleeves, both cufflinks present. Miles Deverell swore softly. One of his wrists was bare. Julian Landry held up both arms. Intact. Father Anselm's cassock, of course, had no cuffs. Poirot's torch moved to the disturbed gravel again. The single large footprint was deep on the outer edge, as though its owner had lurched sideways, perhaps pushed, perhaps pushing. "Someone met Monsieur Voss here," Poirot said quietly. "Someone who came from the garden gate, not from the house. They struggled. The stiletto," he bent to examine the wound, "was driven upward beneath the ribs. A woman's height, perhaps, or a shorter man striking from below. Then the murderer fled back into the garden. Madame Sinclair arrived moments later." Vivian began to shiver uncontrollably. Diana put an arm around her despite the blood. "I didn't kill him," Vivian whispered. "I swear by Gerald's grave, I didn't." Lydia found her voice. "We must get her inside, and someone must telephone the police." Colonel Hawthorne gave a short, humourless laugh. "Telephone, my dear Lydia, the exchange closes at 10. The nearest constable is 12 miles away, at St. Austell, and the road along the cliff is washed out twice every winter. We are cut off until morning, perhaps longer." He looked down at the body, then at the narrow path that led only downward to the sea or upward to the house. "Until the moon sets," he said grimly, "we are 10 people on a rock in the Atlantic with a murderer. And one of us has already killed tonight." The wind rose, whipping Vivian's hair across her blood-streaked face. Far below, the sea hurled itself against the rocks with a sound like breaking bones. Poirot closed Voss's staring eyes with 2 gentle fingers. "Non, mon colonel," he corrected softly. "We are 9 innocent and 1 guilty. And Hercule Poirot is here to discover which is which. The hunter's moon has not yet reached its fullest. Let us see what other prey it means to claim before dawn." He straightened, the small, immaculate figure absurdly out of place beside violent death, yet somehow its absolute master. "First," he said, "we carry the body inside, then we lock every door, every window, and then, mes amis, we begin." Above them the moon hung huge and merciless, waiting. Chapter 6. Suspects in the Spotlight. The long gallery had become an interrogation chamber. 2 hours before dawn, the great chandelier blazed, every bulb burning as if light itself could keep death at bay. Reginald Voss lay on a hastily improvised bier of library tables pushed together, a silk damask curtain drawn respectfully over his face. The stiletto had been removed, cleaned, and placed on a silver salver like an exhibit in court. The blood-stained tarot card and the single crescent moon cufflink rested beside it. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the room, small, immaculate, and terrible in his calm. The others were arranged in a rough semicircle, on chairs dragged from every corner of the house. No one had changed. Dressing gowns and evening clothes mingled grotesquely. Exhaustion and fear had stripped away the social masks. What remained was raw. Poirot began without preamble. "We will establish first the exact movements of every person after the tarot game ended at 1:15. No one will leave this room until I am satisfied. Colonel Hawthorne, you first." The colonel sat ramrod straight, revolver now holstered at his hip like an old campaign habit. "Went straight to my room. Diana can confirm she was already there. Heard nothing until the scream." Diana Hawthorne nodded, white-lipped. "I took a sleeping powder, dead to the world until Archie shook me awake." Poirot's eyes moved to Miles Deverell, lounging with deliberate insolence, one cufflink missing. "And you, monsieur?" Miles shrugged. Needed air after Lydia's little horror show. Walked the upper terrace, smoked 2 cigarettes, came back in through the library. Must have been 1:30, perhaps 1:45. Didn't see Voss. "You lost a cufflink." "Apparently." Miles turned his bare wrist lazily, careless of me. Julian Landry spoke next, voice hoarse. "I went to the music room, played the piano, softly, until perhaps 2. I often can't sleep. Ask Miss Green. She passed me in the corridor." Miss Green, small and brown as a wren, started violently when her name was spoken. I couldn't sleep either," she stammered. "Lady Constance takes Veronal. I waited until she was settled, then walked downstairs for warm milk. I did see Mr. Landry at the piano. He was playing something mournful. Debussy, I think." Lady Constance snorted. "My companion creeps about like a mouse. I neither heard nor cared." Father Anselm's deep voice followed. "I spent the time in the chapel, yes, Lydia. Your house has a perfectly adequate chapel, though you never use it. I was praying for every soul under this roof, especially one who may soon have need of it." Lydia herself sat very straight on a high-backed chair, hands clasped in her lap. The steel curlers were gone. Her hair fell in silver waves, making her look older, almost regal. "I went to my room," she said quietly. "I locked the door, poured a brandy and tried to read. I heard nothing until the commotion." Vivian Sinclair had been given brandy and a blanket. She sat apart, eyes enormous in a bloodless face. "I sat up for perhaps half an hour," she said, voice thin. "I kept thinking about the card, the moon, deception, hidden enemies. I decided to walk. The cliff path always calms me. I left by the garden door at the end of the east corridor. I met no one going down. Coming back, I found him." Poirot held up the stiletto. "This knife, madame. You recognize it?" Vivienne stared as though it might strike. "It's mine, from my dressing table. I use it for letters. Anyone could have taken it." Poirot laid the knife down and picked up the cufflink. "Someone lost this during the struggle. Someone who came from the garden side, not the house. The footprints prove it." Miles Deverell raised an eyebrow. "Convenient that mine is missing. Almost as though someone wished to point the finger. Or," Poirot said mildly, "someone tore it free in the struggle, and it fell." Colonel Hawthorne stirred. "Look here, Poirot. The woman was found kneeling over the body, soaked in blood. Knife hers, motive plain as day. Voss as good as admitted tonight he knew something about Sir Gerald's death. Seems open and shut." Vivian flinched as though struck. Poirot's voice cut like a cold blade. "Nothing, mon colonel, is ever open and shut when Hercule Poirot is present. Consider, the wound was delivered upward, with great force. Madame Sinclair is tall, yes, but the angle suggests the killer stood slightly behind and below. On that path it would be difficult. Also, the knife entered exactly between 2 ribs, severing the aorta instantly. That is not luck. That is anatomical knowledge, or practice." He turned to Father Anselm. "You, mon père, were a medical student once, before you took orders. Is that not so?" The priest's face did not change. For 2 years, yes. Then God called me elsewhere." Poirot nodded. "And you, Colonel, performed field surgery in the trenches, I believe. Mr. Landry dissected cadavers for a play he was researching. Even Miss Green nursed her mother through a long illness. Many hands here could have struck that blow." He paced slowly before them. Now the time. Voss left the house some minutes before Madame St. Clair. Someone was waiting for him on the path. Someone who knew he would come. They argued. The cufflink was torn free. The knife struck. The murderer fled upward into the garden and, this is vital, did not re-enter the house by the main doors, or we would have seen footprints in the dew on the terrace flags. There is a second gate, lower down, that opens directly into the old herb garden. From there, one could reach the back stairs unseen. Lydia's eyes widened. "The herb garden gate is rusted shut, hasn't been opened in years." "Yet tonight," Poirot said, producing a small key from his pocket. "I found this key in the lock, freshly oiled. Someone prepared their escape route carefully." Miss Green made a small, choked sound. Poirot's gaze fixed on her. "Mademoiselle Green, you were seen near the cliff gate earlier tonight. You held something metallic in your hand. Was it this key?" The companion's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Lady Constance turned on her furiously. "Evelyn, speak, girl!" Miss Green began to cry. Silent, hopeless tears. I only wanted to see the moon from the lower terrace," she whispered. "I found the key on the path days ago. I thought it pretty. I meant no harm." Poirot studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Very well. We have lies, half-truths, and fear in abundance, but we have one undeniable fact. Reginald Voss is dead, and his killer sits among us now, warm, breathing, listening." He let the silence stretch until it screamed. "I propose," he said at last, "that we all retire, under guard. Colonel, you and Mr. Deverell will take turns watching the corridors. At dawn, we will search every room, every cupboard, every soul if necessary. The hunter's moon reaches its zenith tonight. I think our murderer intended this death to be the first, not the last. We have perhaps hours to prevent a second." He looked at each face in turn, some defiant, some terrified, one or two unreadable. "Remember this. Hercule Poirot does not sleep when murder is unfinished, and Hercule Poirot never fails." The chandelier flickered as though a giant hand had shaken the house. Outside, clouds were beginning to mass on the horizon, racing in from the Atlantic. The moon, almost but not quite full, looked suddenly vulnerable. In the hush that followed, the clock in the hall struck 5. Dawn was still 2 hours away, and somewhere in Mooncliffe Manor, a killer smiled behind a mask of grief or innocence, counting the minutes until the moon was perfect and the next act could begin. Chapter 7. Hidden Paths and Secrets. Dawn never truly arrived. A low, bruised sky pressed down on Mooncliffe Manor, and the sea had turned the colour of gunmetal. Rain lashed the windows in sudden, spiteful gusts, as though the Atlantic itself resented being shut out. At 7:30 the house was searched, room by room, cupboard by cupboard, with the methodical thoroughness of a military operation. Colonel Hawthorne and Miles Deverell acted as escorts. Poirot and Julian Landry did the actual searching. Nothing was sacred. Mattresses were overturned, trunks forced, the priest's breviary shaken for hidden letters. They found brandy, morphine, a packet of compromising photographs in Lady Constance's jewel case, and, in Miles Deverell's sponge bag, a second stiletto identical to the murder weapon. Miles merely smiled when it was produced. "Always carry a spare, old boy. One never knows when a lady might need protecting." By 10 o'clock they had reassembled in the library, soaked, exhausted, and no closer to certainty. The corpse of Reginald Voss still lay in the long gallery under its damask shroud, waiting for the coroner who could not reach them until the tide and the storm allowed. Poirot stood before the tall windows that looked over the cliff. The herb garden gate was visible far below, a black rectangle against the grey-green tangle. "Enough of rooms," he declared. "Now we search the ground. The killer left by that gate last night, and the rain has not yet fallen long enough to destroy all traces." He refused offers of company. "I work best alone, when the little grey cells must speak to the earth." Wrapped in a voluminous Burberry and a green felt hat pulled low, Poirot descended the zigzag path that the servants used for bringing up seaweed and samphire. The wind tore at him. Salt spray stung his cheeks. When he reached the herb garden, he moved slowly, eyes quartering every inch. The gate hung ajar, exactly as he had left it at dawn. The lock showed fresh scratches and a smear of machine oil. Someone had forced it weeks ago and kept it workable ever since. Beyond the gate lay a narrow ledge of rock, then a steep goat track that switch-backed down the cliff to a strip of shingle the locals called Smuggler's Cove. Even in calm weather the path was treacherous. Today it was a waterfall. Poirot studied the muddy verge. One set of prints, small, narrow, a woman's court shoe, went down a few yards and returned. Vivienne's nocturnal walk, perhaps. But higher up, almost hidden beneath, an overhang of gorse, he found what he sought. A single clear imprint of a large man's brogue, heel deep, toe light. Someone had stood here for several minutes, waiting. The same shoe that had scuffed the gravel above the murder scene. He knelt, shielding the print with his body, and took a plaster cast with the small kit he always carried. Then he noticed something else. A thread of midnight blue wool caught on a thorn. The colour of Lydia Lavenham's dressing gown. Poirot's moustache twitched. Interesting. He followed the track downward. Halfway to the cove, the path forked. One branch continued to the shingle, the other, almost invisible, turned sharply into a cleft in the cliff. A rusted iron ring had once secured a gate here. Now only splinters of rotten wood remained. The cleft widened into a low tunnel. Smuggler's work, 18th century. Poirot's torch picked out damp walls green with lichen, then a pile of more recent debris. Broken gin bottles, cigarette ends, a woman's silk stocking stiff with salt. At the far end, a second gate, modern padlocked, barred the way. But the padlock was new and oiled, and the ground before it was scuffed as though many feet had passed. Someone had been using this tunnel regularly. Poirot examined the padlock closely. Scratched into the brass, almost invisible, were the same entwined moon and star. He did not attempt to force it. Instead he retreated, memorizing every detail. On the way back he paused at the herb garden again. A patch of earth near the lavender had been disturbed recently. The soil was darker, richer. Kneeling, he scraped with his penknife and uncovered a small tin box buried no more than 6 inches down. Inside, wrapped in oilskin, lay a bundle of letters addressed in a woman's elegant hand to my darling R, and signed V, love letters, passionate, explicit, and dated over the past year. Vivienne St. Clair and Reginald Voss. But the last letter was different. It began, "If you will not give me what is mine by right, I will take it by force. Gerald's journal is in your possession, and I will have it, even if I must open your heart to find it." Poirot closed the box thoughtfully. Blackmail, then, or something older. He climbed the path slowly, mind racing. When he reached the terrace, Lydia was waiting under the shelter of the loggia, pale but composed. "You found something," she said. It was not a question. "Several somethings, mademoiselle, including a thread from this garment." He held up the midnight blue strand. Lydia did not flinch. "I often walk in the herb garden. The mint helps me sleep." "And the tunnel. You know of the tunnel that leads from the cove to—" "Where exactly?" For the first time her mask slipped. "It comes up in the old ice-house beneath the chapel. My grandfather used it for brandy during the war. I thought it sealed years ago. Yet someone has unsealed it. Someone with your crest on the padlock." She met his eyes, steadily. "Then you had better find out who, Hercule, before the moon rises tonight. Because whatever game began 15 years ago ends at moonrise. I did not bring you here for amusement. I brought you here to stop a second murder." Poirot studied her for a long moment. "Whose murder, mademoiselle?" "Mine," she said simply. "Or the murderer's? I no longer much care which." She turned and walked back into the house, leaving him alone with the wind and the gulls. Poirot looked down at the cove. The tide was rising fast. Already the shingle was half submerged. By nightfall, the tunnel would be the only way in or out of Mooncliffe Manor. He slipped the tin box into his pocket beside the plaster cast and the blue thread. "Very well," he murmured to the storm. "The board is almost set. One more piece, perhaps two, and then the end game." Above him the sky darkened further. Thunder growled far out at sea, the first warning of the storm that would trap them all until the hunter's moon burned clear again. Poirot turned toward the house. His small feet left precise prints in the wet gravel, prints that pointed inward, toward revelation, toward confrontation, and almost certainly toward another death before morning. Chapter 8. Twists of Fate. The storm broke at 4 o'clock with the fury of something long caged. Rain hammered the roof like thrown gravel. Lightning clawed across the sky and lit the long gallery in sudden ghastly white. In those flashes, the shrouded figure of Reginald Voss seemed to jerk and twitch, as though reluctant to remain dead. Poirot had ordered everyone into the gallery for safety. The great oak doors were barred, the French windows locked and shuttered. A coal fire roared in the enormous grate, yet the room felt colder than the night outside. They sat in a ragged circle, lit by the leaping flames and a single candelabrum on the piano. No one spoke. The only sounds were the wind, the rain, and the occasional nervous click of Lady Constance's lorgnette. Poirot stood before the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, eyes moving from face to face. "It is time," he said quietly, "to stop pretending. In 2 hours, the moon will rise full, clear of the storm, I think, for such nights, always clear at the fatal moment. Before then we will have the truth, all of it." He placed his small evidence wallet on the table and began to lay out the pieces like a conjurer, revealing cards. Item: a cufflink lost in violence. Item: a thread of midnight blue wool. Item: a plaster cast of a man's shoe print. Item: a bundle of letters that prove Madame Sinclair and Monsieur Voss were lovers, and that she threatened to kill him if he did not return her husband's journal. Item: a key, freshly oiled, to a smuggler's tunnel that ends beneath this very house. He paused. Thunder answered him. From these we know the murderer is among us, but we do not yet know why. That is the piece still missing. He turned suddenly to Father Anselm. "You, mon père, heard a confession 15 years ago that you have carried ever since. The night weighs heavier, you said. Tell us now, whose confession?" The priest's face was grey. "I cannot break the seal." "You can," Poirot cut in, not unkindly. "When the penitent is dead, and the sin has borne new fruit in murder. Speak, or I will name the sin myself." Father Anselm looked at the shrouded body, then at Lydia. Something passed between them. Old understanding, old sorrow. "It was Lydia," he said at last, voice barely above the storm. 15 years ago in London. She confessed to pushing a man from a balcony during a quarrel. The man was paralyzed for life. She was young, terrified, in love with the wrong person. I gave her absolution on condition she make restitution. She has tried anonymously ever since." Miles Deverill gave a low whistle. "So that Cairo story I told last night wasn't entirely fiction after all." Lydia did not look at him. She stared into the fire. Poirot nodded. "And the man on the balcony?" "Reginald Voss," she said. Her voice was steady now, almost relieved. "He was my lover then. He threatened to expose me unless I paid. I paid for years. Then he grew greedy. When I bought Mooncliffe, he followed, bought the mortgages, threatened to ruin me again. I invited him here to buy the letters back. He laughed, said the price was now the house itself." Vivian St. Clair rose slowly. "There is more." She walked to the shrouded figure and drew back the cloth with steady hands. Voss's dead face stared up, rigid with surprise. "Gerald's journal," she said. "Reginald had it. He showed it to me last year. Proof that Gerald was murdered on Everest by his own climbing partner. The partner paid Voss to keep silent. The partner is here tonight." Every head turned toward Colonel Hawthorne. The colonel did not move, but his hand crept toward the revolver at his belt. Poirot raised a hand. "No, not yet. The colonel was on that expedition, yes, but he was not the partner Gerald trusted with the rope." He turned to Miles Deverill. "You were Gerald St. Clair's rope man, were you not? The brilliant young climber everyone believed died in a crevasse the year before Gerald's accident. A convenient death, non? You changed your name, grew the moustache of a dissolute aristocrat, and waited. When Voss began blackmailing the widow, you saw your chance." Miles smiled, slow, almost admiring. "Clever little man, but you have no proof. I have this." Poirot produced the plaster cast, the shoe print from the herb garden, size 10, Barber country brogue, right heel worn distinctively on the outer edge, climber's gait. "You bought 2 pairs in Chamonix in 1923, monsieur. One pair was found on a body identified as Miles Deverill. The other pair you are wearing now." He stepped closer. "And the cufflink? You tore it from your own sleeve deliberately after the murder, to cast suspicion elsewhere. But you made one mistake. The thread caught in the gorse was midnight blue, Lydia's dressing gown. You wore her gown last night, did you not? To walk the cliff path unseen. You left it in the tunnel this morning. I found it an hour ago, wrapped around Gerald St. Clair's missing journal." Miles's smile never wavered, but something feral moved behind his eyes. "Bravo," he said softly. "But you are forgetting one thing, Poirot. We are trapped here until morning, and I still have this." He moved